Hey folks, David Stewart here. Before I go any further today, if you're watching this on Sunday, I still have a couple books for free. First two Moonsong books, so you can grab those if you haven't grabbed them yet. If you're watching this after the fact, well, you can still buy them. The first one's only 99 cents for the ebook. So anyway, first topic for the week. Culture is downstream of politics. Now, you may have heard Andrew Breitbart famously say that politics is downstream of culture. And so I'm reversing that. Culture is downstream of politics. And here's what I mean by that, is that if you control the mechanisms of the state, you have the power and the ability to affect culture and the cultural attitudes towards a variety of things, which in turn can then feed back into the political mechanism. I'll give you an example, which is public schooling and universities. So thinking of universities as non-state entities is not accurate because they get lots of money from the state in the form of grants, and many of the universities are in fact public universities owned by the state. So I'm going to put that a little bit to the side here. They are an extension of the state in the same way that public schools are, but maybe in a slightly lesser extent because they are able to privatize a large portion of their profits that they make from charging tuition to young people. Anyway, if you are able to control the public schools, then you have captured not only a portion of the state, which you can use to your own ends, but you've also captured the people themselves. So you have children basically imprisoned in your little realm of the state for 6 or 7 hours a day. And during those 6 or 7 hours a day, you can tell them basically whatever you want to tell them. And indeed, the politics at the state level can determine what is going to go on in that classroom to some extent, but really it comes down to the people that are part of the schools. In other words, if you get a lot of leftists to enter into the educational system, then they are going to transfer their values onto the next generation. They are going to be preaching those values to children for hours every single day. And what do you get at the end of that? You get a child that is going to be further to the left than their parents or that their culture that should be raising them and should be instilling the values in them and helping them to create a worldview which will let them interpret reality correctly and to find happiness, all that kind of stuff. You are pushing that further to the left at the very least. And this was true even of me. I went to public school and was basically indoctrinated. And while I was very far to the right of my peers, I wasn't far to the right of my father. And it took me years of deprogramming after I entered into universities and even became liberalized more to a certain extent. Once I became disillusioned with a lot of the stuff with universities, I began to go further to the right. On your perspective on your screen, that's the right. So I was going further to the right than I was, and eventually as a man, close, not approaching, well, I'm approaching 40, I'm 37. As a 37-year-old man, I'm basically where my father was politically as a 37-year-old, if not just a little bit to the left of him. So really, it's like what happened was the school programmed me to not think like my father because I wasn't spending 8 hours a day with my father. I was spending 30 minutes a day with my father, an hour a day with my father, maybe less depending on what was going on in my life and what age I was at. Certainly in high school, I saw my parents not nearly as much as I saw them when I was smaller. So of course that's going to push me to the left. So all you have to do as far as capturing the culture is control parts of the state which can then influence culture. And public schools are one of the best ones that you can do that with. But there's more than that. There's like the National Endowment for the Arts, where you are basically going to pay artists to create the art, which is politically correct for what you want. As long as you can control that little element of the state, then you're able to control what is being pushed out to the culture. So culture is downstream of politics. Now, there's other examples to this too, is that if you are able to change the legality of something, that in turn will change the cultural attitudes towards that thing. Just as an example, if we talk about abortion was not legalized democratically. It was done via judicial fiat. And in the decades since abortion was legalized, it's become more popular and more accepted, and in generally the culture has been more accepting of abortion under a variety of circumstances, when it was not so accepted when that change was imposed upon the populace. And for some people, they've become more hardened against it. And this change has happened despite the fact that in the decades since Roe versus Wade, we've come to understand a lot more about prenatal development, about the development of a human fetus into a baby, and what is going on there physiologically. And the more you know, the more it becomes difficult to support abortion as a logical person, to view what is being killed inside of a woman at 20 weeks as being something less than human. So despite these scientific advances that have let us know exactly what's going on in the prenatal development, abortion has become more accepted. So in that case, culture is downstream of politics. And really what I'm talking about here is it goes both ways. If you can capture a part of the state and change the legality of something, either make something illegal or make something legal, which has previously been illegal, the cultural acceptance of that will change. Notice especially here in California, medical marijuana basically changed attitudes towards marijuana. Marijuana was viewed as something as, it's a drug, you shouldn't do it, shouldn't be accepted, that guy's a pothead, we don't want to have him around, to generally a fairly accepted practice at parties and things like that. It would be only certain kind of parties used to have a lot of pot smoking at them, and even fewer would have more hard drug use. And I think that that's shifted over the years towards a much greater acceptance of cannabis usage. So that's another example where once you change the legality of something, the cultural attitudes around it start to change. And in that case, it was only one small change. This was done democratically, so I don't want to say it wasn't imposed upon the population. But once people had that little pill of medical marijuana, then they started to view the entire thing as much less harmful, more acceptable, and in general, we ended up with a democratic approval of marijuana in general here in California, at least for personal use. So the culture shifted not because people were just out there in the culture, but because the legality of something changed and then began to push the culture towards a certain area. So anyway, that's my topic for today, which is just politics are downstream of culture, but really culture is also downstream of politics. And I think it's a mistake to ignore the abilities of the state to change the cultural attitudes of people through force, through capturing children, capturing attention, changing legality, imposing legality or illegality of things upon people, which in turn makes those things part of their everyday life, and then they become culturally accepted. I think the role of the state is a little bit underrated. Like some people and some attitudes can persist despite the state, but it's usually going to be things where people are very hardened, like their religion. A lot of people are not going to just give up their religion because the state said so. Although we've had coronavirus this year, which, in California they banned mass, so you get to ban worship services, and people are like, okay, I guess we don't go to church anymore. They banned church, and people kind of fell in line with that. And will people return to church once they are allowed to return to church? That's a bigger question, because you could have another example where politics changes culture, where people become less involved in their religious institutions because the state banned religious gatherings temporarily, right? So yes, culture is influenced by politics, and then they have a feedback loop there where the culture in turn will influence a little bit of the political discussion for the next go around. So what's the solution there? It's either to, your side has to capture the state, or your side has to reduce the power of the state in such a way that it can't influence the culture in a significant way. So I'm a big believer in small government for that reason, is that the government puts its tentacles into culture and changes not just what's legal or illegal, but the entire thing that surrounds us, the culture, the attitudes towards people towards each other. If the culture around us changes in a way that's negative, and the state's the result of that, that's a problem for me. Is I don't want to live in a culture that the state has changed to be one that is not beneficial for me or my children to live it. Okay. So anyway, that's my topic for today. Thanks so much, guys. I do appreciate it. So if you're watching this today, City of Silver and Tyrant's Gallop, both of those are free today, and you can check those out. And if you're watching a later date, you can buy them, hopefully. And I'll have more. I'll have book 3 coming out soon. So thanks so much, and I'll see you next time.